Hello friends and fashion lovers, welcome and welcome back. My name is Esther and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to make this lovely baby dress. If you're here for the first time, I love to sew for babies and ladies. If that sounds like what you're interested in, please don't forget to click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified each time I upload a new video. For this tutorial, I used a satin fabric, a lining, sequins fabric, horsehair braid or crinoline, whatever you call it, and a zipper. To start with the pattern drafting, I have my zipper allowance here. So I'm folding my pattern paper in half and I'll be drafting both the front and the back. So I'm starting with drawing my shoulder line or a guideline. Then here I'm putting in half the shoulder measurement and seaming allowance. Yes, my pattern will include seaming allowance. Then the neck width. The measurement I'm using is for a 5-year-old, and the front neck deep, I'm connecting that. Next is to mark the shoulder slope and the chest line. So I'm connecting to indicate those lines. Then I go in on the chest line. I put quarter of the chest measurements and half-inch ease plus my 1-inch seaming allowance. Yes, this pattern has seaming allowance and the measurement you need is also on the screen. Then find the midpoint of that chest line and note it. Then I'm going to go ahead and connect my back armhole. So that is for the back armhole. Then at that midpoint, I'm going to go in by half an inch. And I'll be connecting my front armhole as well. So now that the armhole is out of the way, the next thing to do is to put the bodice length. So the bodice length, you will include your seaming allowance. I use 1-inch seaming allowance on my bodice length. So next is to put the waist measurement, but I'm using the same chest measurement as the waist measurement. Then slant the side by half an inch. So right now the front bodice and the back bodice is behind. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out this pattern. So I'll cut the back armhole first. After cutting the back armhole, I'm going to use the pattern and adjust to cut the front armhole. So I'm going to fold away my back zipper allowance. And I'm going to adjust my back neckline. So I'm just marking 3 inches from the down part and I'm going to connect it. So when it comes to the back neck design, it's totally your choice. So this was my choice. So now that I've adjusted the back, the pattern is ready. Just note that you are cutting the front on fold while you're cutting the back 2 times. So I've placed my pattern on my lining to cut. So I'm cutting my lining, not my fashion fabric. Please note, this is lining, not the fashion fabric. So now that my lining is cut out, I am going to take it and set it aside. So it's time to adjust this pattern for my fashion fabric, for the main fabric. So I'll just find midpoint of the shoulder, just mark the midpoint of the shoulder halfway and take your ruler You could do it in a curved manner or a straight manner. This is your choice. So I decided to go with a slight curve, though it wasn't very obvious at the end of the day. It's very something subtle. So once again, find the midpoint at the back shoulder and draw how you want it to be. So I just curve this out nicely. So I'm going to go ahead using my scissors to separate this. And since I have different armholes, so I'm labeling it side, back, side, front. So now the pattern is ready. You're going to ensure to add 1/2 inch seaming allowance to this cut out part so that you'll be able to stitch it back. I placed my pattern on my fashion fabric and I'm cutting my fashion fabric. After cutting my fashion fabric, if you can notice that I have my seaming allowance, so I can use it to sew it back up. So I'm going to go ahead and open my fabric. So that's the front, and for the back, this is the center back. I am placing it right side facing on the center front. The same with the sides. I'm placing them right side facing, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch them at the shoulder. Once again, right side facing, I'm going to stitch them at the shoulder. Then on my lining piece, I am also going to place the back and the front right side facing, and I'm going to stitch it at the shoulder. So after stitching it at the shoulder, I've opened it up. This is how it looks. So next is to get my measuring tape, leaving out my 1/2 inch seaming allowance up there. I'm going to measure what I have left and also leaving my seaming allowance down. So the measurement that I have, I've gone ahead to cut my sequence 1.5 times that length. So this is what I mean by 1.5 times. This is it. It goes once and halfway through. That's 1.5 times. Then you can make it twice that length, but I didn't want to do it twice the length. So in case you're asking about the width, so I have 5 inches here and the length is 1.5 times. I also have a satin fabric to make my sequence stable. So it's the same length and the same width. So I'm going to place it right side facing, and I will be stitching it. So I'll stitch the short side, the long side, and the other short side, and I'm repeating the same step for the second part. After stitching, I clip the corners so I can turn it out nice and pointy. After turning it out, you want to give it a nice press so that everything will be nice and straight. After that, I will be attaching it to my bodice. Yes, after giving a good press, I'll go ahead and sew it on my bodice. So this is it. I've sewn it on my bodice. You want to make sure that you have the sequence right side facing, and you're going to gather it up a bit. It's not going to be that much. You can even give it a slight pleat like I did, and make sure it's right side facing. Stitch that down on your center, front and back bodice. After that, you want to go in, ensuring that your right side is facing the other side of the satin looking up. You're going to place your side piece, match the shoulder seam and the end seam, and pin it in place. And you're repeating it for the second side, matching everything up, and you're going to stitch it down as well. So after stitching it down, remember that mine was a slight curve, so I'm going in to notch so that it can be a bit relaxed for the next step. You can understitch the seaming allowance, but I'll be doing that not right now. For now, I'm going to bring my lining, have them right side facing. I am going to go ahead and pin it in place, matching the shoulder seams first, the mid neck and the back. So with all this properly aligned and pinned, I'm going to take to my sewing machine and stitch that neckline. After stitching the neckline, I'm going in with some notching. So you always want to notch your curves like this so that they can relax. After notching, I'm flipping it to conceal this raw edge neckline. So after flipping it, you want to give it a good press. But for me, I'm going to understitch that. You would want to understitch that nicely, your raw edge towards your lining. After understitching and giving it a good press, we want to finish the armhole now. So you just roll one side of it, open the armhole, sandwiching the whole bodice in the shoulder. Yes, you want to match up that shoulder seam and secure that in place. Don't worry, in case you are a bit confused at this point, I am going to take it again. So you want to stitch that down. After stitching, go ahead and notch the armhole. Then you pull it out. So I like to pull mine through the front out. By the time you get one side of your bodice out, the other side is pretty much easier to pull out like so. So in case you were confused of what I did with the armhole, so this is the open side. So to the side I'm not going to sew yet, I'm just going to roll it like so. So just make sure you roll it nicely, and you are going to sandwich it along the shoulder seam. So you want to open this armhole, right side facing, match the shoulder seam, and also pin the rest of the parts in place. Want to pin it in place like so, and stitch it down as well. After stitching, notch comes. Want to notch to relax the curve edge. Then the pulling and tagging, the gentle pulling comes to reveal the right side. So now that the right side is out, you can give it a good press. Whatever needs to be understitched, do that. And this is how it looks on the wrong side or the lining. So you want to place the side, right side facing, match the armhole seam and stitch it in place. Place the right side facing, fashion fabric to fashion fabric, lining to lining. I've done this so many times. You want to secure that in place, and also take to your sewing machine and stitch that down. After stitching, the bodice is complete. You can see how easy it is to finish it nicely. So this is pretty much. One thing to note when it comes to this bodice is I left half-inch seaming allowance to be able to join it nicely to my skirt. So don't forget to leave yours. So now to the skirt now. You want to measure the waist. Take the waist measurements. You can do 2 times, but I use 3 times the waist measurements. Added seaming allowance. And my lining is 1.5 inches shorter than my main fabric. And for the length of this skirt, you want to know that the dress length is a factor of your bodice length and your skirt length. So your skirt length, you are going to add seaming allowance because you are joining the bodice to the skirt, and also you are going to hem it. So whatever length that you want, include your seaming allowance. About 1 inch should be okay, ½ inch for the upper part and ½ inch to sew your horsehair braids. So for the horsehair braid, you are going to be placing it on the right side, and when you stitch that down, you can flip it to the wrong side for it to be hidden. I know there is a lot of tutorial on how to sew horsehair braid, so I'm not going to even bother making one right now. So I'm going to be using horsehair braid at the hem of this dress. So once again, you sew it from the right side and you flipped it over to the wrong side. That is how it's mostly sewn. So without much of ado, let's proceed with the other side of the skirt. Before sewing this horsehair braid on my skirt, there are a few things I like to do. Firstly, my daughter likes the horsehair braid totally concealed, so I have a strip here I'm going to be using to conceal the horsehair braid. So I'm going to sew the strip and the skirt piece, and at the end of the day I'll flip it over for my horsehair braid to be totally concealed. So that is what I'm going to do. But before sewing this my horsehair braid, I am going to go ahead and divide my back piece and stitch the side of my back skirt and my front. Then also stitch the center of my back, that's the middle of the back, and leave some opening up. That is before I attach my horsehair braid or crinoline. So I will do the stitching first before sewing it on. Okay, this is me sewing my horsehair braid down, and I'm sure you'll be like, what is she doing? Why is the horsehair braid facing the other side? And this is the time I have to say thank you for subscribing and for sticking around despite my crazy way of sewing. I love you guys. And let's go on with the tutorial. So after stitching the horsehair braid down, I'm going in with an iron and I'm giving it a nice press. You want to always press when you're working with horsehair braid, because it can act funny if you don't press it down. So after pressing it down, I am going to fold this part in the raw edge. Then I am flipping it over and I'll stitch that down nicely. So this is how it looks after stitching it down, and I went ahead to gather the waistline, and I've done the same for the lining. I've gathered my lining. So here are all my pieces ready. So in case you're looking for extra volume on your skirt or your dress, you want to make use of can. So how you're going to use it in terms of this dress, you are going to be pleating it along the waistline. Yes, you're going to pleat it along the waistline. Please note that I did not sew my skirt totally. I have a zipper extension. So I also have a zipper extension too on my main skirt or fashion fabric. So now it's time to go ahead and place it right side facing. I have pinned my fashion fabric to my fashion fabric. That's the skirt to the bodice. You want to pin that down, and I'll stitch it down. Then also pin my lining to my lining, right side facing, and I'm going to stitch that down as well. So after stitching it down, this is how it looks. Lining to lining, fashion fabric to fashion fabric. On the right side, it will be this nice. And on the other right side, the fashion fabric right side is nice as well. So I also hem my lining. You want to do that. You want to hem your lining. The next thing to do is to install your zip. Yes, that zipper extension that I said that I left on my skirt is still there. So I sew close the other part. Yes, I stitch close that part, but I still have opening for zipper. I used invisible zipper a lot for ball dresses. So please, I have a tutorial on how to install invisible zippers. Check it out. So for the bow, the extra blink on the icing. So you want to measure 13 inches by 10 inches. At least that is what I use for mine. So 13 by 10 inches. So the white fabric is 10 inches by 7 inches. So what you do is flip the longer side and you're going to stitch, leaving like 2-inch opening, and you are stitching the side too. I know you know how to make this bow. Let me not dwell on it. So here I have unstitched my main fabric and my lining. Just tack it so that my lining does not look out of this dress. So the bow is also ready. So I'm going to be putting this bow at the back. I've fixed the zipper as well, and the bow is going on right there. So that's pretty much about this dress. And all I can say at this point is thank you for watching. I really appreciate you, and I'll be seeing you shortly with the next tutorial. Mwah! Love you plenty.